Good morning. Today is the 11th day of Kislev, the 24th of November. And we're going to finish the question that he asked yesterday. The question that he asked was, how can it be that something would be affected by surrounding light? That's basically the question that he asked. Because he said, when you talk about, we said there's two avenues or two chains of creation. The one creates the inner light, or is using the inner light. The other one's using the surrounding light. The inner light creates what we call the light in the vessels, and the external light, or the encompassing light, creates the vessels themselves. But the encompassing light is not ever, it's just encompassing, it's around. So how is it affecting? How can you say that it affects and it even creates something? That doesn't make a lot of sense in the beginning. That was the question.
Osmotic pressure.
Osmotic pressure. So he says, so the example I gave you yesterday, the mashal I gave you yesterday about the thought, and we said we here have to change a whole way of thinking, that the thought is everywhere. It's just that in terms of the inner light, it's being expressed in the brain, but it must be everywhere. There must be, so we talked about yesterday about there being maybe organs that have their own capacity to think. In any case, he's not really talking about that. He's talking about the fact that the encompassing light is everywhere at the same time. Okay, this is
I have a good map for you on that.
Yeah.
Organs, from the Rambam.
Yeah.
The Rambam says you sit down to eat here, and you shouldn't keep eating when you're eating 3/4 of what you need.
Right, 2/3.
Stop, right? Mm-hmm. So it shows you that there's some message coming from the gut to the brain, not from the brain to the gut. The gut now says, listen, eaten enough, so now stop. The brain itself didn't stop.
Are you sure that that's what it means?
I thought it was you stop before you're safe.
Right.
That was it.
I understand it's the brain telling the gut, stop.
Yes, stop. That's how I.
Because then you'd stop eating immediately. But given that you got to wait a certain amount of time until the gut feels the food, then you're happy to stop. So
You're saying that even the fact that I can feel how full I am, that I would know what 2/3 is, so that means that the gut has some kind of a messaging system. It tells you.
It's interesting.
But really, I think I sort of led you astray when I gave that all these examples, because what he means to say is that we see that there's encompassing light, and it affects the entire body the same way. It's like what we talked about in the previous mimer that we learned. It's not about there being an organ that can think or can't think. It's really about the fact that encompassing light is equally everywhere. And even if it can't be expressed by the organ, it's there. That's what he really wants to say. Okay? So if it's like that, if we accept it as true, so we're at Va'inyan. Va'inyan udishnehem emet. They both are true. There is how the brain affects the foot directly. That would be called inner light, because it's integrated. It's in the nervous system. So that is the one channel. The begilui en ma'machshava klal baregel ela b'moach, aval be'elem yeshna baregel kmo b'moach mamash b'shaveh. So on the one hand, it seems to us that it is something that takes time. It's an inner process. It's the nerves transmitting the signal. On the other hand, he says, it's also equally in both at the same time. And again, in their times, the proof for this, or the sign of this was that it happened instantaneously. They didn't know about transmission times. So as far as they were concerned, 200 years ago, when you looked at this, there was no understanding yet of an electrical signal passing through the nervous system. For them, it was instantaneous. So that's how they saw it. So now, what do? In our generation, we know that the inner process is one that takes time. So again, the point is that there is something that makes it equally he says it behelem, in the concealed dimension, it's equally the same. So I've always said that this example doesn't hold up anymore. When we use this example here, it's following a very important principle that in Chasidus you have to give, for every concept in Torah, you should give two examples, or two parables. One parable should be from psychology, the other parable should be from science. This is like a principle of Chasidus, that if you can't explain it to me, if you can't give me an example of the same thing, that there are two channels of effect here. You can say one is concealed and one is revealed, that's fine. But you have to show me in psychology something like that, and in science, something in the natural world. Show me something in the natural world that is this way. So in the natural world, it's actually controversial, but we have it very much today. And it's called, basically, Bell's inequality. Okay, it's called Bell's inequality. What does it say? It says, and this is something that's been studied mostly in the last 40 years, and the big breakthrough happened in the last 10 years, is that it seems to us that there's something wrong with quantum mechanics. And what's wrong there, I'm sorry to use these big words.
Oh, this is part of quantum. Yeah. This is a big...
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
That we understand the way things are, and we can make this happen, is that particles are coupled. Meaning, you put one photon, you set them up in a certain way when they're together, and then you take one to one side of the universe and one to the other side of the universe. So you do a simple experiment on one, you already know how the other is going to turn out. And the question is, how do they know? Without doing the experiment, nothing happened to the to one photon. You have to do something to it. And the moment you do that, even if the distance is, there's no way light even can travel this, right? You're billions of light years away. Instantaneously, the other side knows exactly what happened there. How is that possible? So Bell's inequality was an attempt to show that if that happens, if that's true, it was long before there was coupling particles. They sort of understood this concept, but not completely. And what he showed was that if quantum mechanics is to be complete, it has to assume that there is instantaneous action at a distance. And it doesn't matter how big the distance is. Okay? So this was a very big problem, because if it is, then it contradicts Einstein's theory of relativity. Okay, and his theory of relativity assumes something very, very important. Without that assumption, the whole thing doesn't work, which is that the speed of light is constant. And not just constant, it's the fastest speed possible. 300,000 kilometers per second, and there's nothing else that can go beyond that. But here you have to have instantaneous connection across far vaster distances. So there's two answers to it. The one is throw relativity out, which, by the way, the Rebbe does. The Rebbe doesn't believe Einstein's relativity. He has a long letter, not long enough. Yeah. He studied by Einstein. He heard his lectures. But that's not why he doesn't agree with it. It's not because he didn't like Einstein's lectures. Yeah. He has a very, and I've talked about this in Hebrew in length, it's a very long story about why the Rebbe doesn't agree with Einstein's take on relativity, and it's important to know that there were alternatives. And the Rebbe, then, in 1902, 3, 4, 5, and the Rebbe was very much for these other alternatives. And the main reason that he didn't like was the assumption that the speed of light was constant. That, he said, doesn't exist in this world. To say that something physical is set in stone, he doesn't accept that. He says that's not the way that science works. If you would be forced to say that because of measurements and things like that, and a lot of people cite the Michelson-Morley experiment, which sort of set up that there's no ether and so on. So if you would be forced to say that, maybe. But since there's nothing forcing you, and the Michelson-Morley experiment does not force you, contradictory to popular understanding, so the Rebbe says it can't be. You can't assume that it's constant. So that's one option. Throw relativity out, and it's fine, and the quantum mechanics stands. The other options, the options being explored now, it's being explored for a while now. It's called wormholes, and they used to think that wormholes were something that would happen only in special circumstances. But then, 10 years ago, somebody hit upon the simple idea that this whole thing of action at an immediate action at a distance might be because of wormholes. And then suddenly we got this concept that wormholes are everywhere. Wormholes are basically tears in the fabric of time and space, and they sort of like connect two places together, and then you get this instantaneous action. It doesn't matter what the mechanism is in the end, whether the mechanism is because relativity is wrong, the speed of light is not the fastest speed, or whether it's wormholes. In the end, everybody agrees that this cannot be thrown out right now, that there is immediate action at a distance. And that says that everything, that there's an encompassing light, in a certain sense, we don't know, again, we don't know what the mechanism is, but it's describing the same thing. There is an ability for things to act without time lag. In other words, even though my brain takes some milliseconds to tell my foot to move, one photon does not take any time to tell the other what to do. It's instantaneous. And so in my opinion, if I had to push it today, so I would say we have other examples from science. We have other examples. Now the question is, where do we have an example of this from psychology? This was the scientific example. Although it's sort of like in between, because he's telling you, look at yourself. It's like a little bit psychological. But do we have examples of this in psychology? Do we have examples of instantaneous action where the head and the foot are exactly the same in our psyche? Is there such a thing? Well, the answer is simple. Instead of saying this anatomically, physiologically, this whole example of the brain telling the foot, right? Take that away for a second. Don't worry about the foot for a second. Think about the foot's representation in the brain. That is instantaneous. Even though it takes time to propagate the signal, in the brain's representation of the entire body, everything is the same. Everything is the same.
It's like a constant connection.
It's not just a connection. It's not even. We're not even talking about the connection. The brain has even called homo something. I don't know, homunculus, something like that. You can look at. I'll find the exact word. I always forget the word because it's a strange Latin word that I don't understand. But what it comes to say is, you look it up in Wikipedia, you'll see that there's a small person in the brain. But this person is not normal. He doesn't have like normal hands. It's like us. But the brain's representation is that the hands are huge. Why? Because there's a lot of nerve endings here. And so we do a lot of things with our hands. The eyes are really big. The head is really big. The feet are really small. It's a very strange type of person. But the brain represents the entire body in itself. In itself, without propagating anything. Otherwise, it wouldn't make... So, where do we see this, unfortunately? After somebody suffers severe trauma from an accident, and they have to go through years of physical therapy. That physical therapy is really meant to reestablish the connection between the brain and the limbs. So I have this friend now that I've been davening for 6 years for, and he's in a state where he's making progress, but it's very slow. And what he describes is, in my head, I have no problem telling my foot to move. It's just that when I do it, the foot doesn't move. In my brain, my brain has a perfect representation of the body. You don't lose anything. There it's instantaneous. It's just that it doesn't propagate. Why? Because of the severe trauma that the nervous system went through. So because of that, we have these two systems. So the one system is the brain's representation of the entire body. And then that would be ol makif. That would be the brain seeing everything in an encompassing light. It sees everything in the body as a representation. It is what it is, and I can immediately access it. There's nothing... now you're talking about actually communicating with that limb. That takes time. And that will be the second process of ol pnimi, of inner light. Okay? But in any case, what do we see? We see that the ol makif, that the surrounding light, which is hidden, it wasn't known until very recently. I mean, I think the last 100 years, they've begun to speak about the body's representation inside the brain and how that works exactly. But we see that there's an effect it affects it. It does something. So where were we? Okay. So, כמו כן יובן למעלה, שהרת זיו כבודו יתברך הבלתי בעל גבול מחיה את כל העולמות מאין, אף על פי שאינו מושג בתוכיותם. It says in the same, so now we've established the parables. We have these two parables, and the parable that he gave, which we said, is a little problematic today, because we don't understand it the way they did. So, from these parables, you can now understand that God influencing reality with his limitless light, with this limitless aspect, which becomes the encompassing light, has an effect on reality and actually creates something. Now this is a little bit distant from our homonoculus, the little man inside, because it's very hard to say that the brain thinking of or having a representation of the leg creates the leg. Yeah. It's very hard to say that. The leg seems to exist without any connection. But, and here's where it could be that it's different. When you talk about the photons, when you talk about action, immediate action at a distance, there it does change something in reality. And to say it in the language of quantum mechanics, before the experiment was done on one photon on one side of the universe, the other photon was in a state of not yet being. It's not yet completely here. It becomes here the moment you do the experiment on one side. The moment you give this side some reality, the other side also receives reality. That's closer. That's closer to what he's saying here. Here he's saying that this limitless ability, again, this is why we call it limitless, because action at a distance would be a limitless light of God. It would be a revelation that God is acting here and here at the same time without any limits. So that creates what we call encompassing light, because we can't fully understand it. But the bottom line is, and to make things simple, is that the limitless aspect of God is concealed, the limited aspect is revealed, the limitless aspect creates the encompassing light, which is usually concealed from us, and the encompassing light is what creates the vessel itself. It's what brings matter into being, and the limited aspect of God is what creates what we call the inner light, and that creates the energy, the life force inside the vessels. Okay, so these are the two tracks that we talk about in Chasidut, and it's a very important differentiation between the two. Like I said, this was hit upon, this way to define things, to articulate it. The concepts themselves, they come from Torah. But to say this, the way we just said it, it was hit upon only in the Middle Ages. Meaning this was articulated by the early philosophers, where Kabbalah began to divert or diverge from philosophy. Philosophy was taking just one track, normally, and the one track is always the inner light. It didn't talk about the coming into being from God's unlimited aspect. Kabbalah diverged from philosophy when that began to be the way they spoke. And so it had to be two separate paths now. So that happened sometime in the Middle Ages. Again, you can't say this in Torah, and a scholar can't say this unless he has some inkling of this from the Torah. There has to be some example of this from the Torah. So the general way that it's usually explained is that this is what it means. God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens are in a state of unlimited, and the earth is in the state of limited, or the heavens are the encompassing light, and the earth is the limited light. This, on the face of it, seems quite arbitrary. There are many examples that are of more exact verses that discuss this. You need one more, and usually do four. And 4 worlds. You always do 4 worlds. And the af is Apasitiv is always separate. So there's other examples. We're not going to get into them now. And okay, let's see if we can finish a little bit more. כי בחינת האור פנימי הנקרא ממלא מצטמצם לפי מזג הכלי המקבל כנ"ל במשל הכוחות בנפש באיברי הגוף שברגל יהיה ההילוך בגילוי ולא השכל לפי שאינו מוכן לקבל צורת השכל. And the limited light or the limited revelation of God is always creating the O pnimi, the inner light, and that is always integrated according to the abilities of the specific organ. So like we said, the foot will not think, but like we said, in the encompassing light, there is an aspect, as it were, of thought. ועל דרך זה, הנה החיות שבעולם הזה בכללו מצומצם מאוד, היינו מבחינת דומן צומח חי מדבר. In the same way, the life force, which is the inner light in our world, is always very limited. When you say limit, you're talking about inner light. You're talking about God's revelation of His limited aspect. So that's what we see in all the parts of our physical world. The inanimate, the vegetable, the animal, and the speaker, the man. ובגן עדן התחתון, שהוא חניות העולם העשייה, חיות בגילוי יותר. But then if you go just a little bit higher, you're still in the limited, what did I call it before, like the channel that's going on. So you have above that, you have something called the lower Garden of Eden. The lower Garden of Eden is a spiritual state in which you can perceive more spirituality. But it's still limited. It'll always be limited. Remember, that's what we said about this whole concept of there being a Garden of Eden being the name of the world that the soul goes to after you've passed away. It's a continuation of this world. It's just without the physical. So because you're not hindered by the physical, you grasp more of the spiritual. But it's still along the same channel of inner light, of God's limited revelation. So because of that, we can't say, again, we're going to get to this, we can't say that that would be the world to come. The whole point now is that he's going to get to is that the world, our world, the world reality now, including all the spiritual levels, doesn't matter how high you go, they're part of the inner light. The world to come that we speak about, the world after the resurrection of the dead, Olam HaTchiyah, that is the world where the Sovev is revealed. Where the encompassing light, meaning the unlimited aspect of God, is revealed. It also exists now, but now it's not revealed. So that's why the Ramban, and that's why he said that Kabbalah diverged from philosophy. The Rambam, Maimonides, he's the philosopher. He remained a philosopher through to the end of his life. Nachmanides was a Mekubal. He was a Kabbalist. So he already diverged. And so he speaks of both aspects, the limited, which Maimonides and all the philosophers spoke about, and the unlimited. So that's why for Ramban, it can't be that the world to come is just another aspect of the limited light. It can't be. It must be something new. Why? Because I call it a different world. The sages, when they chose language, they didn't tell us, oh, we mean limited light, unlimited light. That wasn't their language. But you can understand from the fact that they say there's two worlds. There's this world and the world to come. So what do you mean? The whole difference is just that I see more of the same? That's not a different world. That's just grades. That's levels. So that but when they say that this is a different world, you have to think of two different, completely separate categories of God's revelation. And so that's how Kabbalah understands it. That the different types of revelation are the limited aspect, which creates the inner light, and the unlimited aspect, which creates the encompassing light. In this world, we can only reveal the inner light, the limited aspect of God. In the world to come, we will be living the revealed, encompassing light. It will be revealed, it will be experienced. To be revealed means it will be experienced. What does it mean that it will be experienced? That the body will no longer only be limited. It will also enjoy, since the body is created from the encompassing light, it will now be revealed that it is unlimited.
And it doesn't die.
And that's why it doesn't die.
Yeah.
So that's basically the gist of the argument about these two aspects. We need all this in order to understand tzitzit.
I don't think I know an inch, a centimeter